Marcus Donovan stood in the doorway of his parents' estate that December night, his face twisted with contempt as he watched his wife Elena struggle to lift her dying mother from the threadbare couch, her thin frame shaking under the weight. He had no idea that the trembling woman he was throwing out into the blizzard was the secret multi-billionaire who had inherited his parents' entire billion-dollar real estate empire 3 months ago. The empire he thought would be his, the fortune she'd kept hidden while scrubbing his floors and enduring his cruelty. Elena's mother collapsed in the snow outside, coughing blood onto the pristine white driveway. But Marcus simply slammed the door, already texting his mistress about their weekend in Aspen, completely unaware that the sick woman dying in his driveway had been the one who built half of Manhattan's skyline, and that her daughter now controlled every property, every asset, every single dollar he believed was rightfully his. What Elena did the next day would not only destroy Marcus's entire world, but would expose secrets about his parents' empire that would shatter him so completely, he would wish he had frozen to death in that same blizzard. But how could a woman he treated like a servant for 3 years suddenly hold the keys to a billion-dollar empire? What had his parents hidden from him, and why did they choose her over their own son? And when Elena walked through those courtroom doors 24 hours later, what revelation would she bring that would make Marcus realize he just kicked out the one person who could have saved him from the catastrophic truth about to consume everything he'd ever known? Elena's fingers had gone numb an hour ago. She knelt in the snow outside the estate, her mother's head cradled in her lap, watching the shallow rise and fall of her chest grow slower with each passing minute. The Christmas lights Marcus had insisted she hang just last week cast cheerful colors across her mother's gray face, a mockery of joy in this moment of absolute devastation. Her mother's lips moved, trying to form words, but only a wet rattling sound emerged. Blood stained the corners of her mouth, dark against the white snow accumulating on her hospital gown. 3 years. Elena had endured 3 years of Marcus's verbal abuse, his casual cruelty, his assumption that she was nothing more than a convenient maid who also warmed his bed when he felt like it. She'd scrubbed the marble floors of the Donovan estate until her knees bled. She cooked elaborate meals for his business associates while he introduced her as the help to anyone who asked. She'd smiled through the humiliation, the degradation, the soul-crushing weight of being treated as less than human, all because her mother had begged her to stay, to keep the peace, to wait for the right moment, the right moment. Elena almost laughed, a sound that came out as a sob. Her mother had promised that everything would make sense soon, that Elena needed to trust her, that there were things she couldn't explain yet. And Elena had trusted her, even when Marcus threw plates at the wall inches from her head, even when he brought his mistress Vanessa to their bed and expected Elena to change the sheets afterward, even when he told her she was worthless, stupid, lucky that someone like him had married someone like her. A car's headlights swept across the driveway, and for one desperate moment Elena thought Marcus had changed his mind, had found some shred of humanity buried beneath his entitlement. But the vehicle passed by, disappearing down the private road that wound through the Connecticut estate. They were alone, completely alone. Elena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out with shaking hands, her mother's blood staining the screen as she tried to read the message. It was from Daniel Rothstein, her mother's attorney, the man who had visited the hospital 3 months ago when her mother received the terminal diagnosis. The man who had handed Elena an envelope and told her not to open it until her mother passed. The man who had looked at her with something like pity and respect mixed together in his ancient eyes. "I see the news," the text read. "Your mother's heart monitor alert came through to my office. I'm so sorry, Elena, but you need to call me immediately. Tonight. What I have to tell you cannot wait until morning." Elena stared at the message, her mind struggling to process the words. News? What news? The only news was that her husband had just thrown her and her dying mother out into a December blizzard, that her mother was taking her last breaths in the snow, that Elena's life had finally reached the absolute bottom of hell. Her mother's hand found hers, the grip surprisingly strong for someone so close to death. Elena looked down into her mother's eyes and saw something there that stopped her breath. Not fear, not pain, but purpose. Her mother's lips moved again, and this time, Elena heard the words, "The papers under your mattress." "Mom, don't talk. I'm calling an ambulance. We're going to—" "No." Her mother's voice was firm despite the blood bubbling at her lips. "Listen, everything is yours. The Donovan Empire, all of it, his parents, left it. To me. I left it. To you. He knows nothing." The words made no sense. Elena's mother was a former real estate developer, yes, but she'd been retired for 15 years, living modestly in a small apartment in Queens, working part-time as a consultant. The Donovan Empire belonged to Marcus's parents, Robert and Catherine Donovan, the real estate moguls who had built half of Manhattan's luxury skyline before dying in a plane crash 2 years ago. Marcus had been named CEO of Donovan International Properties after their death. He controlled everything, or at least that's what he believed. "Mom, I don't understand. What are you—" "I built it." Her mother's eyes blazed with sudden intensity. "Catherine was my sister. Robert was my partner. I stayed, hidden, protected you from that world, but they died, and they knew what their son was. They changed the will 3 months before the crash." The world tilted sideways. Elena felt as if she'd been dropped into ice water, every nerve in her body screaming that this couldn't be real, couldn't be true. Her mother and Catherine Donovan were sisters? The empire was built by her mother? Marcus's parents had disinherited him? "The papers," her mother repeated, each word costing her. "Everything, every property, every account. Yours, Daniel has. The rest. Make him pay for what he did to you. Promise me." "I promise," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I promise, Mom." Her mother smiled then, a real smile, the first Elena had seen in months. "Good girl. Now, let me go. I'm so tired." "No, Mom, please. I can't do this without you. I don't know how to." "You've been strong for 3 years. Keep being strong. Make them all see who you really are." The next breath didn't come. Her mother's hand went slack in hers. The snow continued to fall, covering them both in a pristine white blanket that hid the blood, the tears, the end of one world and the violent birth of another. Elena sat there for she didn't know how long, minutes, hours. Time had lost all meaning. Her mind kept circling back to her mother's words, trying to make them fit into the reality she'd known her entire life. Catherine Donovan had been her aunt. She'd seen the woman at charity galas, at society events Marcus dragged her to, always from a distance, never introduced, never acknowledged. But now that Elena thought about it, she could see the resemblance. The same green eyes, the same sharp cheekbones, the same way of holding themselves with quiet dignity, even in rooms full of vultures. Her phone buzzed again. Daniel Rothstein. She answered without thinking. "Elena, where are you?" His voice was urgent, crackling with some emotion she couldn't identify. "Outside, in the snow." "She's gone, Daniel. My mother is gone." A pause, then, very quietly, "I'm sending a car for you, right now. Do not go back into that house. Do not speak to Marcus Donovan. Do not do anything until we meet. Do you understand me? I need to get the papers from under my mattress. Forget the papers. I have copies of everything. I have the originals. I have documents that will burn that man's entire world to ashes. But I need you safe first. The car will be there in 8 minutes. Can you make it to the end of the driveway?" Elena looked back at the estate, the house where she'd been a prisoner for 3 years. Every window blazed with light. Through the massive bay window of the living room, she could see Marcus on the couch, his feet up, watching television, drinking what was probably his third whiskey of the night. He'd already forgotten about her. She was that inconsequential to him. Something cold and hard settled in Elena's chest, something that felt like steel forged in fire. "I'll be there," she said. She gently closed her mother's eyes, whispered a prayer she'd learned as a child, and then stood on legs that shook but held. She walked down the long driveway, leaving her mother in the snow, leaving 3 years of humiliation behind, walking toward a future she couldn't yet comprehend, but knew with absolute certainty would destroy Marcus Donovan in ways he couldn't begin to imagine. Behind her, the estate lights continued to blaze. Ahead, through the swirling snow, she saw headlights approaching. Daniel Rothstein's car, her mother's attorney. Her attorney now, she supposed. The man who held the keys to a billion-dollar empire that Marcus believed was his. Elena smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had finally found the weapon they needed after years of being defenseless. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow I'll show him exactly who I am. The law offices of Rothstein and Associates occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building in Midtown Manhattan, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a city that glittered like scattered diamonds in the pre-dawn darkness. Elena sat in a leather chair that probably cost more than her entire wardrobe, wrapped in a blanket someone had draped over her shoulders, holding a cup of coffee she couldn't taste. Shock, probably. Or maybe this was what revenge tasted like in its earliest stages. Bitter. Necessary. Absolute. Daniel Rothstein sat across from her. A man in his 70s with silver hair and eyes that had seen every possible human atrocity and still somehow maintained faith in justice. He'd laid out document after document on the massive mahogany table between them, each one another nail in Marcus Donovan's coffin. Your mother, Margaret Chen, was born Margaret Blackwood, Daniel began, his voice gentle despite the devastating information he was delivering. She and Catherine Blackwood, who later became Catherine Donovan, were sisters. Twins, actually. They started Blackwood Properties in 1989 with a single apartment building in Brooklyn that they renovated with their own hands. By 1995, they'd expanded to Manhattan. By 2000, they owned 37 properties across 3 states. Elena stared at the photographs Daniel pushed across the table. Her mother, young and vibrant, standing next to Catherine in front of a construction site. Both women wore hard hats and carried blueprints. Both wore identical smiles of determination. Robert Donovan came into the picture in 2002, Daniel continued. He was a finance genius, handled all the investment strategy while your mother and Catherine handled the development and design. Together, they built Donovan International Properties. But here's where it gets complicated, Elena. Your mother insisted her name be kept off all public records. She had her reasons. Reasons that involve protecting you from the kind of attention and danger that comes with that level of wealth. What kind of danger? Elena's voice sounded hollow to her own ears. Daniel's expression darkened. Your father. Elena, I need you to listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because it explains everything about why your mother did what she did. Your father, Thomas Chen, was not who your mother thought he was when they married. He was connected to organized crime, specifically real estate fraud and money laundering operations. When your mother discovered this, when you were just 2 years old, she tried to leave him. He threatened to kill both of you. The coffee cup shook in Elena's hands. Daniel gently took it from her and set it aside. Your mother went to Catherine and Robert. Together, they created an elaborate plan. Your mother would publicly leave the company, would divorce your father, would take you and disappear into a normal life. But secretly, she retained 49% ownership of Donovan International Properties. Catherine and Robert held the other 51%. If anything happened to Catherine and Robert, your mother's share would increase to 75%, with the remaining 25% held in trust for you. It was a protection mechanism, a way to ensure you'd always be taken care of, even if your mother couldn't do it herself. Elena's mind reeled. And my father? What happened to him? He died in prison 7 years ago, fraud charges. But your mother never stopped being afraid, never stopped hiding. She raised you away from all of this, gave you a normal childhood, a normal life. She thought she was protecting you. Until I married Marcus, Elena whispered. Daniel's jaw tightened. Yes, until you married Marcus. And Elena, your mother tried to stop that wedding. She begged you not to go through with it. Do you remember? She did. The morning of the wedding, her mother had pulled her aside, had gripped her hands so tightly it hurt, had said, you don't have to do this. I have money, more than you know. We can leave right now, please, Elena. But Elena had been young and stupid and thought she was in love with Marcus's charm, his good looks, his promises of a fairy tale life. She'd dismissed her mother's concerns as overprotectiveness. She'd walked down that aisle anyway. Marcus's parents knew who you were the moment you married their son, Daniel said quietly. Catherine reached out to your mother immediately. They had long conversations about whether to reveal the truth. But your mother was still afraid, still hiding. So they came up with another plan. They would watch. They would wait. They would see what kind of man Marcus truly was. And they discovered he was a monster, Elena said. Worse, they discovered he was his father's son. Elena looked up sharply. What does that mean? Daniel pulled out another folder, this one marked with red tape. Robert Donovan wasn't the man the world thought he was either. Oh, he was brilliant with money, no question. But he was also ruthless, cruel, and had a particular talent for breaking people who got in his way. Catherine spent 30 years trying to soften him, trying to bring out whatever humanity he had left. Sometimes she succeeded. Mostly she failed, but she loved him anyway, God knows why. He opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Elena's stomach turn. Marcus at various ages, always with bruises that official reports attributed to sports injuries. Medical records showing broken bones, concussions, burns. Police reports from neighbors about screaming coming from the Donovan estate. Reports that were mysteriously dismissed. Robert Donovan abused his son for 18 years, Daniel said, his voice thick with disgust. Catherine tried to protect Marcus, tried to get him away, but Robert had too much power, too many connections. By the time Marcus was old enough to escape, the damage was done. He'd learned to be exactly like his father, cruel, entitled, incapable of seeing other people as human beings. Elena thought about the man she'd married, the charming facade he'd shown her during their courtship, the monster he'd revealed the moment the wedding bands were on their fingers, the casual cruelty, the constant degradation, the absolute conviction that he was superior and she was worthless. It all made terrible, perfect sense now. Catherine and Robert saw what Marcus was becoming, Daniel continued. They saw how he treated you, and 3 months before they died in that plane crash, they changed their will. Everything went to your mother, with the understanding that she would leave it all to you. Marcus was left with nothing. Not $1, not one property, nothing. But he's been running the company for 2 years, Elena said. How is that possible? Daniel's smile was sharp as a blade. He's been running the company on a salary, Elena. A generous salary, yes, but a salary nonetheless. He has no ownership. He has no shares. He has no control over the board of directors. He's been an employee pretending to be an owner. And every decision he's made, every property he's sold, every deal he's signed, has been subject to approval by the actual owner of the company. My mother, your mother, and now as of 11:47 last night, when your mother's death was officially recorded, you are the sole owner of Donovan International Properties. You control assets worth approximately $4.7 billion. You own 237 properties across 12 states and 4 countries. You employ over 3,000 people, and you have the power to do absolutely anything you want with that empire, including burning it to the ground if that's what you choose. Elena sat in silence, trying to comprehend numbers that large, power that absolute. $4.7 billion. It was more money than she could spend in 10 lifetimes. It was more money than most people could imagine, and it was hers, all of it. While Marcus, who had thrown her out into the snow, who had let her mother die in his driveway, had nothing. What happens now? She asked. Daniel pulled out one more document, this one a simple letter on Donovan International Properties letterhead. Now you have choices. You can take control publicly, which would mean Marcus learns the truth immediately along with the rest of the world. Or you can do something more strategic. Strategic. There's a board meeting this afternoon at 2 o'clock. Marcus is planning to announce the sale of the Riverside Complex, a property in Manhattan worth approximately $200 million. He thinks he has the authority to make the sale. He does not. The board knows this. They've been waiting to see how you want to handle the situation. Elena's mind began to work again, pulling out of shock and into something sharper, clearer. The board knows about me? Your mother has been in contact with them regularly for 2 years. They've been documenting every decision Marcus has made, every mistake, every example of his incompetence and cruelty. They've been building a case against him, waiting for your mother to give the order to remove him. That order never came because your mother got sick. But now you can give that order. The question is, how do you want to do this? Elena thought about the past 3 years. Every humiliation, every moment she'd been forced to smile while Marcus introduced her as the help to his associates. Every time he'd brought his mistress home and expected Elena to pretend she didn't exist. Every casual cruelty, every degrading comment, every second she'd felt less than human. "I want him to know," she said quietly. "I want him to understand exactly what he did. I want him to realize that when he threw me out into the snow last night, when he let my mother die in his driveway, he was destroying his own life. I want him to see it coming. I want him to watch everything he thought was his disappear. And I want him to know that I'm the one taking it from him." Daniel's smile was approving. "Then I suggest you attend the board meeting this afternoon. Walk through those doors, sit in the chair at the head of the table that's been waiting for you, and introduce yourself as the new owner of Donovan International Properties." Elena stood, the blanket falling from her shoulders. Her clothes were still damp from the snow. Her hands still had her mother's blood under the fingernails. Her eyes were red from crying. But something else was there too now, something that hadn't existed 24 hours ago. Power, purpose, and the absolute certainty that Marcus Donovan was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. "I need a shower and clean clothes," she said. "Already arranged. There's a suite upstairs with everything you need. I took the liberty of having your assistant select appropriate attire." "My assistant? You're a billionaire now, Elena. You'll need staff. I've taken the liberty of assembling a preliminary team based on your mother's recommendations. They're all yours if you want them, or you can hire new people. Your choice. Everything is your choice now." Elena walked to the window and looked out over Manhattan. Somewhere in this city, Marcus was probably just waking up, hungover, maybe rolling over to find Vanessa in bed beside him. He was probably thinking about the Riverside Complex deal, probably mentally spending the commission he thought he'd earn. He had no idea that his entire world was about to implode. No idea that the woman he'd treated like garbage for 3 years was about to become his worst nightmare. "Daniel," she said, not turning from the window, "I want every piece of evidence you have about what Robert Donovan did to Marcus when he was a child. Every police report, every medical record, everything." "May I ask why?" "Because I'm not just going to take away his empire. I'm going to take away his excuses. Marcus chose to be cruel. He chose to be abusive. He chose to be like his father. And when this is over, I want him to understand that he could have been different, that he had every opportunity to be better, and that he threw it all away because he couldn't see past his own entitlement and hatred." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Your mother would be very proud of you." Elena finally turned from the window. "Then let's make sure I give her something to be proud of." The Donovan International Properties boardroom occupied the entire top floor of a building in Lower Manhattan, with 360-degree views of the city that shimmered in the afternoon light. The table was black marble, surrounded by 18 leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars. 17 of those chairs were occupied by the board members, men and women in expensive suits who held the future of a $4.7 billion empire in their collective hands. The 18th chair, the one at the head of the table, sat empty, waiting. Marcus Donovan stood at the presentation screen, clicking through slides that showed architectural renderings of the Riverside Complex transformed into luxury condominiums. His suit was Armani, his watch was Patek Philippe, his confidence was absolute. He had no idea that every person in this room was about to watch him be destroyed. "As you can see," Marcus said, his voice carrying the smooth authority of someone who believed he owned the world, "the Riverside conversion will generate approximately $40 million in pure profit within the first year. I've already negotiated with Belmont developers. They're ready to close within 30 days. All I need is board approval to move forward." Richard Castellano, the 70-year-old chairman of the board, leaned back in his chair. "And you're confident this is the right move for the company?" "Absolutely. This property has been sitting stagnant for 3 years. It's time to monetize it. My parents would have done the same thing. Your parents, Richard repeated, his tone neutral. I see. Marcus frowned. Something in Richard's voice felt off, felt wrong. He looked around the table and noticed that none of the board members were looking at him. They were all looking at the door. Is there a problem? Marcus asked. Not a problem, Richard said. We're just waiting for one more person before we proceed with the vote. One more person? The board is fully seated. Who are we? The door opened. Elena walked into the boardroom, wearing a black Chanel suit that fit her perfectly. Her hair pulled back in a severe bun that emphasized her cheekbones, her mother's pearl necklace at her throat. She'd spent 2 hours with the team Daniel had assembled, learning how to walk like she owned the world, how to speak with absolute authority, how to command a room full of people who held more collective wealth than most small countries. She'd learned fast. She'd had good teachers. And more importantly, she'd had 3 years of rage to fuel her transformation. Marcus's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion, shock, then anger. What the hell are you doing here? I told you to never come back to... Sit down, Mr. Donovan, Richard said quietly. Mr. Donovan? Marcus laughed, a harsh sound. Richard, what's going on? Why is my wife... Sit down. Richard's voice was steel. Marcus sat, more from shock than obedience. Elena walked slowly around the table, letting him watch her, letting him see the transformation. She wasn't the trembling woman he'd thrown into the snow. She wasn't the servant he'd degraded for 3 years. She was something else now, something he couldn't comprehend. She took the empty chair at the head of the table, the chair that had been waiting for her, the chair that commanded the entire room. Good afternoon, Elena said, her voice calm and clear. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Elena Chen Donovan. As of 11:47 last night, I became the sole owner of Donovan International Properties, controlling 75% of all shares and assets. The remaining 25% is held in trust under my management. I am now the majority shareholder, primary decision maker, and legal owner of this company and everything it controls. The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus stared at her as if she'd suddenly sprouted a second head. That's impossible, he finally said. This company belongs to me. My parents left it to me. You're lying. This is some kind of sick joke. Elena looked at him with the same expression she might give to something unpleasant she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. Your parents left you nothing, Marcus. Not $1, not one property. They disinherited you 3 months before they died. Everything went to my mother, Margaret Chen, who was Catherine Donovan's sister and co-founder of this company, and my mother, as of last night, left everything to me. Marcus's face had gone white. You're lying. Catherine didn't have a sister. My mother never. Your mother had a twin sister who built this empire alongside her, Elena interrupted. A sister she protected by keeping her identity hidden from people exactly like you. A sister who watched for 2 years as you ran this company into the ground while pretending you had authority you didn't possess. A sister who documented every mistake, every cruel decision, every example of your staggering incompetence. She nodded to Daniel Rothstein, who stood and began distributing folders to each board member. In those folders, Elena continued, you'll find comprehensive documentation of every decision Mr. Donovan has made in the past 2 years. You'll find records of properties sold below market value to his friends. You'll find evidence of deals made that benefit him personally at the company's expense. You'll find testimony from employees about his abusive management style, his sexual harassment of female staff members, and his consistent pattern of putting his own interests above the company's welfare. In short, you'll find everything you need to understand why his parents made the decision they did. Marcus stood, his chair scraping harshly against the floor. This is insane. You can't do this. You're nobody. You're just the woman I married because I felt sorry for you. You don't know anything about running a company. You don't know anything about this business. I know that you were going to sell the Riverside complex for $200 million to Belmont developers, Elena said, her voice cutting through his rage like a blade. I also know that Belmont is owned by your college roommate Trevor Hastings, and I know that the actual market value of the Riverside complex is $340 million, which means you were going to personally cost this company $140 million to help your friend, who coincidentally promised you a $20 million consulting fee for making the deal happen. Marcus's face went from white to red. You have no proof of... Elena pulled out her phone and played an audio recording. Marcus's voice filled the room, crystal clear. Look, Trev, just stick to the 200 million number. The board won't know the difference. I'll push it through. You get the property at a massive discount, and I get my cut. Everyone wins. Well, everyone who matters. That recording is illegal, Marcus shouted. You can't use that in court. I don't need to use it in court, Elena said. I just need to use it to show this board exactly who you are. Though for the record, the recording is perfectly legal. It was made in Trevor Hastings' office, which has signs clearly posted about recording devices for security purposes. Trevor himself approved the recording, thinking he was protecting himself from you. Turns out he was right to be suspicious. She stood, walking slowly around the table toward Marcus, who backed up until he hit the wall. Last night, Elena said, her voice dropping to something quiet and deadly. You threw me out of your house. You threw my dying mother out into a blizzard. You let her die in the snow in your driveway while you sat inside watching television, drinking whiskey, texting your mistress about your weekend plans. You did this because you thought I was worthless, because you thought I was nothing, because you spent 3 years convinced that you were superior to me in every way. She stopped directly in front of him, close enough to see the panic starting to bloom in his eyes. But I wasn't worthless, Marcus. I was the secret owner of everything you thought was yours. And my mother wasn't just some sick old woman. She was Margaret Chen, one of the most brilliant real estate developers of her generation, the woman who built half of Manhattan's skyline, the woman who created the empire you've been running into the ground for 2 years, and you let her die in the snow. You let the woman who built your entire world die alone and afraid and in pain because you couldn't see past your own cruelty. Marcus's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. So here's what's going to happen, Elena continued. You are fired, effective immediately. Your salary stops today. Your benefits stop today. Your access to all company resources stops today. Security will escort you from the building in approximately 5 minutes. You will not take anything from your office except personal items that can fit in one box. You will surrender all company credit cards, all keys, all access badges, and you will sign a non-disclosure agreement that prevents you from speaking about this company, its operations, or its ownership to anyone for the rest of your life. If you violate that NDA, I will sue you for everything you have, which admittedly won't take long since you have nothing. You can't do this, Marcus whispered. This company is my life. Everything I've worked for, everything you've worked for was built on a lie, Elena said. A lie that your parents let you believe because they were hoping you'd prove them wrong. They were hoping you'd become a better man than your father, but you didn't. You became exactly like him, cruel, abusive, incapable of seeing other human beings as anything more than tools for your own satisfaction. And now you're paying the price for that choice. She turned back to the board. I'm calling a vote to officially terminate Marcus Donovan's employment with Donovan International Properties and to approve his replacement as CEO. All in favor? Every hand went up. Every single one. The motion passes unanimously, Richard said, his voice formal. Mr. Donovan, you are hereby terminated. Security is waiting outside to escort you from the premises. Marcus looked around the room at faces that had been friendly yesterday, faces that were now cold and dismissive. He looked at Elena, and something in his expression shifted from rage to something that might have been fear. You're going to regret this, he said. I'll fight this. I'll take you to court. I'll expose you. You'll do nothing, Elena said, because I have documentation of every illegal thing you've done for the past 2 years. Every bribe, every fraudulent deal, every instance of insider trading. I have recordings, emails, text messages, financial records. I have enough evidence to send you to prison for 20 years. The only reason I'm not doing that is because I don't want to waste any more of my time thinking about you. So you're going to take your box of personal items, you're going to sign the NDA, and you're going to disappear from my life forever. Because if you don't, if you fight this in any way, I will destroy you so completely that you'll wish you died in that blizzard last night with my mother." The door opened. 2 security guards entered, large men with expressions that suggested they'd been looking forward to this moment. "Mr. Donovan," one of them said, "please come with us." Marcus looked at Elena one last time. "I loved you," he said. And it might have been the first true thing he'd said to her in 3 years. "No," Elena replied. "You loved the idea of someone who would take your abuse and never fight back. You loved having power over someone you thought was weaker than you. But you never loved me, Marcus. You're not capable of love. Your father made sure of that." Something flickered in his eyes at the mention of his father. Pain, recognition, the knowledge that she was right and that he'd spent his entire life becoming the thing he'd most feared. "My father was a monster," Marcus said quietly. "Yes," Elena agreed, "and so are you." The security guards took him by the arms. He didn't resist. He just walked out, his shoulders slumped, his confidence shattered. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of the world. Elena stood at the head of the table, looking at the faces of the board members who now reported to her. "The Riverside complex is not for sale," she said. "Cancel the deal with Belmont Developers immediately. I want a full audit of every transaction Marcus Donovan approved in the past 2 years. I want a complete review of all company operations, and I want recommendations for a new CEO who actually knows what they're doing. This company was built by brilliant people with vision and integrity. It's time we return to those values. Any questions?" Richard Castellano smiled. "Welcome to Donovan International Properties, Ms. Chen. Your mother and aunt would be very proud." Elena didn't go home that night. The estate in Connecticut was still Marcus's, technically, at least until the divorce lawyers finished dividing assets that didn't exist on his side. Instead, she checked into the Four Seasons, a suite that cost $3,000 a night, money that now meant absolutely nothing to her. She stood at the window looking out over Central Park, a glass of wine in her hand that she wasn't drinking, trying to process everything that had happened in the last 24 hours. Her mother was dead. Her husband was destroyed. And she was a billionaire who controlled an empire she'd known nothing about 3 days ago. Her phone rang, an unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Elena Chen?" A woman's voice, professional and cold. "Yes?" "My name is Vanessa Pritchard. I believe you know who I am." Marcus's mistress, the woman who'd been sleeping in Elena's bed, wearing clothes bought with company money Marcus thought he controlled. Elena's first instinct was to hang up. Her second was to listen. She went with the second. "I know who you are," Elena said. "Then you know that Marcus and I have been together for 8 months, and you should know that he's currently at my apartment, crying on my couch, telling me that you've destroyed his life." "I'm aware." A pause, then, "Good, because that bastard deserves everything you did to him and more. I just wanted to call and tell you that I'm done with him. I was with him because I thought he had money and power. Turns out he had neither. He was just a bitter, cruel man who needed someone to abuse. I should have seen it sooner. I'm sorry I didn't." Elena was surprised to find that she believed the woman. "Why are you really calling?" "Because Marcus is talking about revenge, about how he's going to make you pay, about how he's going to destroy you the same way you destroyed him. And I thought you should know, because men like Marcus don't handle humiliation well. They get dangerous. He doesn't have the resources to hurt me anymore. He doesn't need resources. He just needs rage and a willingness to do something stupid. Watch yourself, Elena. I've seen what he's capable of when he feels cornered. It's not pretty." The line went dead. Elena stood at the window for a long time after that, thinking about Marcus, about his father, about the cycle of abuse that had shaped both of them. She thought about the boy he'd been, beaten and terrorized by Robert Donovan, and the man he'd become, bitter and cruel and incapable of seeing his own role in his destruction. She thought about whether she should feel sorry for him, whether she should regret what she'd done. She didn't, not even a little bit. Her mother had died in the snow. That was the one unforgivable thing, the one act that could never be excused or explained away or justified by childhood trauma. Marcus had let her mother die, and for that, He would carry the consequences for the rest of his life. Elena's phone buzzed, a text from Daniel Rothstein. Marcus signed the NDA. Divorce papers will be filed tomorrow. You're free of him legally within 60 days. Congratulations, Elena. You survived. She replied, thank you for everything. Then she set down the phone, picked up the wine glass, and toasted her reflection in the window. To you, Mom, she whispered. I kept my promise. I made him pay. Outside, the city glittered. Somewhere in that sea of lights, Marcus Donovan was probably drowning in self-pity and rage. Somewhere, Vanessa Pritchard was probably relieved to be rid of him. And somewhere, in a morgue in Connecticut, her mother's body waited for burial. Elena would arrange the funeral tomorrow. Tonight, she needed to grieve. Tomorrow, she needed to become the CEO that her mother and aunt had believed she could be. But right now, in this moment, she let herself cry. Not for Marcus, not for their marriage, but for her mother, for the years they'd spent hiding, for the truth that had come too late. She cried until there were no more tears left, and then she slept, dreaming of empires and revenge and the long road ahead. The funeral was held on a bitter December morning at a private cemetery in Westchester, where Catherine and Robert Donovan were buried in an elaborate mausoleum that probably cost more than most people's houses. Elena had arranged for her mother to be buried next to Catherine, reuniting the sisters who'd built an empire together and been separated by fear and circumstance for too long. The turnout was larger than Elena expected. Board members from Donovan International Properties, employees her mother had mentored over the years, colleagues from her mother's early days in real estate. They stood in the cold, dressed in black, their breath misting in the frozen air. They'd come to pay respects to Margaret Chen, the brilliant developer who'd hidden in plain sight for decades, the woman whose work had shaped Manhattan's skyline even though her name appeared on no buildings. Marcus was not there. He'd been explicitly uninvited. Security guards stood at the cemetery entrance with instructions to remove him if he appeared. He didn't. According to reports from the private investigator Elena had hired, he was holed up in a cheap motel in Queens, drinking heavily and making phone calls to lawyers who kept telling him he had no case. Daniel Rothstein stood beside Elena as the priest said the final prayers. Your mother left you one more thing, he said quietly, handing her an envelope. She asked me to give this to you after the funeral. Said you'd understand what to do with it. Elena opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single key and a note in her mother's handwriting. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you know the truth. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I'm sorry I let you marry that man. I'm sorry for so many things. But I'm not sorry for what I built, and I'm not sorry for leaving it to you. The key opens a safe deposit box at Manhattan Savings Bank on Fifth Avenue, box number 1127. Inside, you'll find letters I wrote you over the years. Letters I could never give you because they contain truths I couldn't share. Read them, understand them, and then do what you were born to do. Build something beautiful. Make the Donovan name mean something good again. And remember that you are stronger than you know, braver than you believe, and more capable than you ever imagined. I love you. Always. Mom. Elena clutched the letter to her chest, tears streaming down her face. Around her, people were offering condolences, saying kind words, sharing memories. She heard them distantly, as if from underwater. All she could think about was the safe deposit box, the letters her mother had written, the years of hidden truths waiting to be discovered. After the funeral, Elena went directly to Manhattan Savings Bank. The box was exactly where her mother had said it would be, in a climate-controlled vault deep in the building's basement. The key turned smoothly in the lock. Inside were dozens of letters, each one dated, each one sealed, each one another piece of the puzzle that was her mother's life. Elena took the box to a private room the bank provided and began to read. The first letter was dated 28 years ago, written when Elena was just born. Dear Elena, you're 3 days old and you're perfect. Your father doesn't know it yet, but I'm going to leave him. I'm going to take you away from his world, his violence, his corruption. Catherine and Robert are helping me. We've created a new identity, a new life. I'm going to raise you away from all of this wealth and power and danger. I want you to be normal. I want you to be safe. I want you to know kindness and simplicity and love. I hope someday you'll forgive me for what I'm taking from you. I hope someday you'll understand. Love, Mom. The next letter was dated 10 years later. Dear Elena, you asked me today why we don't have a big house like your friends, why we take the subway instead of having a car, why you can't have the expensive toys you want. I wanted to tell you that I'm one of the richest women in America, that I own buildings you pass every day, that I could buy you anything you want, but I didn't, because I'm still afraid. Your father died in prison last year, but his associates are still out there. The criminal world has a long memory, so we stay hidden, we stay small, we stay safe. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I know this isn't fair to you. Love, Mom. The letters continued year after year, chronicling her mother's hidden life, her partnership with Catherine, the slow growth of the Donovan Empire, the difficult decision to stay away even as her work reshaped an entire city. And then, 3 years ago, the letter Elena had been waiting for. Dear Elena, you're getting married tomorrow to Marcus Donovan, Catherine and Robert's son, and I'm terrified. I begged you not to do this. I told you I had money, that we could leave, that you didn't need him, but you're in love, and you won't listen. So I'm going to tell you something I've never told anyone. I know what Marcus is. Catherine has told me stories about Robert's abuse, about how Marcus grew up in a household filled with violence and cruelty. She thinks he's changed. She hopes he's better. But I don't believe it. I see Robert in his eyes when he looks at you. I see the same entitlement, the same casual cruelty, the same conviction that other people exist only to serve him. But you're an adult and I can't stop you. So instead, I'm going to watch and wait. And if he hurts you, if he shows even one fraction of his father's nature, I'm going to make him pay. Catherine and Robert are updating their will. Everything is going to me and eventually to you. If Marcus proves worthy, we'll tell him the truth. If he doesn't, well, then he'll learn a very expensive lesson about treating people with dignity and respect. I pray I'm wrong about him, Elena, for your sake. Love, Mom. The final letter was dated 3 months ago, written in shaky handwriting that showed how sick her mother had become. Dear Elena, I'm dying. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, 6 months at most. And I can't keep the secret anymore. Catherine and Robert died 2 years ago, and they left everything to me just like we planned. Which means I'm leaving everything to you. I'm giving you an empire, sweetheart, and I'm giving you the power to decide what to do with it. Marcus has proven himself to be exactly what I feared. I've documented everything, his cruelty, his affairs, his incompetence. The board is ready to remove him whenever you give the word. But I need you to promise me something. Don't let his cruelty make you cruel. Don't let his abuse turn you into him. Use this power to build, not to destroy. Show him what real strength looks like. Show him that the woman he degraded, the woman he thought was worthless, is capable of more grace and wisdom than he'll ever possess. Make the Donovan name mean something good again. I'm so sorry I left you in that situation for 3 years. I thought I was giving you time to decide for yourself. I thought maybe you'd see who he was and leave on your own. I should have intervened sooner. That's my biggest regret. But I can't change the past. I can only give you the future. Take it, Elena. Build something beautiful. And know that I loved you more than anything in this world. Love always, Mom. Elena set down the final letter and wept. Not tears of sadness now, but something else. Relief, understanding, gratitude for a mother who had loved her enough to hide, to protect, to watch from the shadows, and finally to give her the tools she needed to save herself. She gathered up the letters, placed them back in the box, and carried them out of the bank. The December sun was setting, painting Manhattan in shades of gold and amber. Her mother's city. Her city now. Elena thought about Marcus, drinking in that motel room, probably blaming everyone but himself for his destruction. She thought about what her mother had asked of her in that final letter. Don't let his cruelty make you cruel. Use this power to build, not to destroy. She pulled out her phone and called Daniel Rothstein. I need you to do something for me, she said. Find out where Marcus is staying and send him a check for $50,000. Silence on the other end. Then, Elena, I don't think it's not charity, it's a choice. I'm giving him enough money to start over, to get therapy, to become something other than what his father made him. What he does with it is up to him. But I'm not going to let him blame his destruction on not having options. He'll have options. If he wastes them, that's on him. Your mother would approve, Daniel said quietly. I know. That's why I'm doing it. Elena hung up and looked out over the city one more time. Tomorrow she would start her first official day as CEO of Donovan International Properties. Tomorrow she would begin the work of transforming an empire built on brilliance and fear into something better, something kinder. Tomorrow she would prove that power didn't have to corrupt, that strength could coexist with compassion. But tonight she would mourn her mother and celebrate the extraordinary woman who had given her everything. 6 months later, Elena stood in front of the newly renamed Chen Donovan Properties headquarters, watching as workers installed the sign that would replace the old Donovan International Properties logo. The new name honored both her mother and Catherine, the sisters who'd built this empire together. It was the first of many changes Elena had implemented since taking control. Under her leadership, the company had shifted focus from pure profit to sustainable development. She'd commissioned affordable housing projects in neighborhoods that desperately needed them. She'd implemented strict ethical guidelines for all business deals. She'd fired every executive who'd been complicit in Marcus's corruption and replaced them with people who shared her vision of what the company could be. The board had resisted at first. They'd worried about profit margins, about investor confidence, about whether a woman with no business experience could really run a $4.7 billion empire. But Elena had learned fast, had surrounded herself with brilliant advisors, and had proven that ethical business practices and profitability weren't mutually exclusive. In 6 months, the company's value had increased by 15%, while their community impact had grown exponentially. Marcus had taken the $50,000 Elena sent him and disappeared. According to the private investigator's final report, he'd moved to Oregon and was working as a real estate agent in a small town, making modest money selling modest houses. He'd stopped drinking. He'd started therapy. He was, by all accounts, trying to become someone different than who he'd been. Elena didn't forgive him. She never would. You don't forgive someone for letting your mother die in the snow. But she didn't hate him anymore either. Hate took energy, took focus, took time she'd rather spend building something beautiful. So she'd let him go, released him from her thoughts the same way she'd released him from her life. Vanessa Pritchard had reached out once more, 2 months after the funeral, to tell Elena that Marcus had tried to contact her and that she'd blocked his number. I wanted you to know I'm keeping my distance, Vanessa had said, and I wanted to thank you. Watching you take back your power helped me realize I needed to do the same thing in my own life. I quit my job, went back to school, started over. So thank you. They'd never spoken again, but Elena appreciated the closure. Daniel Rothstein had become Elena's most trusted advisor, teaching her everything her mother and aunt had known about real estate development, about managing wealth, about wielding power with responsibility. He told her stories about Margaret and Catherine, about the early days of the company, about 2 brilliant women who'd revolutionized an industry while keeping one of them hidden from public view. Your mother was the best developer I ever knew, Daniel had said one afternoon in his office. Catherine was the visionary, but Margaret was the one who made the vision real. She understood construction, design, engineering, zoning laws, everything. She could walk onto a property and see exactly what it could become. That's the gift she gave you, Elena. Not just the empire, the vision. Elena had spent months studying her mother's old projects, understanding the philosophy behind each building, each development. She'd learned that her mother believed architecture could change lives, that well-designed affordable housing could give people dignity, that cities could be beautiful and accessible to everyone, not just the wealthy. Those principles now guided every decision Elena made. The sign installation was complete. Chen Donovan Properties. Elena took a photo and posted it to the company's social media accounts, explaining the name change and the company's new direction. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Within an hour, The post had been shared thousands of times with comments praising the ethical pivot and expressing hope that other companies would follow suit. Her phone rang. Richard Castellano, the board chairman. "I'm looking at the quarterly reports," Richard said without preamble. 15% growth while increasing community investment. The analyst said it couldn't be done. "I'm calling to say congratulations and to tell you that you've proven every doubter wrong. Your mother and aunt built something remarkable, but you're making it something better, something that actually serves the city instead of just extracting wealth from it." "Thank you, Richard. That means a lot." "There's something else. The board wants to make your CEO position permanent. No more interim status. No more proving yourself. You've earned this, Elena. Say yes." Elena looked up at the new sign glinting in the afternoon sun. 6 months ago, she'd been a woman with no power, no money, no future beyond endless abuse. Today, she was the permanent CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire, with the authority to reshape how business was done, with the resources to actually make a difference in people's lives. "Yes," she said, "I accept." She hung up and stood there for a moment, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. It wasn't crushing. It was empowering. This was what her mother had wanted. This was what Catherine had dreamed of. Two sisters who'd built an empire together, now honored by the woman they'd protected and empowered. Elena thought about Marcus one last time. Wondered if he'd seen the news about the company name change. If he understood yet what he'd thrown away. Then she let the thought go. He was the past. She was the future. She walked into the building, through the marble lobby her mother had designed 30 years ago, toward the elevator that would take her to the executive floor. Tomorrow she had meetings with architects about a new affordable housing project in the Bronx. Next week she was flying to Chicago to tour properties the company owned there, to assess how they could be improved. Next month she was speaking at a conference about ethical development practices, sharing what she'd learned about balancing profit and purpose. The work was endless. The responsibility was enormous. But Elena had discovered something her mother had known all along. Power wasn't about controlling others. It was about having the resources to make things better, to build things that lasted, to create opportunities for people who needed them. As the elevator doors closed, Elena caught her reflection in the polished steel. She saw her mother's green eyes looking back at her, Catherine's strong cheekbones, the determined expression both sisters had worn in those old photographs. She was their legacy, their hope, their triumph, and she was just getting started. 1 year after her mother's death, Elena stood at the gravesite with fresh flowers and news she wished she could share in person. The cemetery was quiet, covered in fresh snow that reminded her too much of that terrible night. But the memory didn't hurt as much anymore. It had transformed into something else. Fuel, purpose, proof that she'd survived and thrived despite everything Marcus had done. "Hey, Mom," Elena said, kneeling to arrange the flowers. White lilies, her mother's favorite. "I have news. We just broke ground on the Margaret Chen Memorial Housing Complex in Queens. 200 units of affordable housing, built to the highest environmental standards, with community spaces and support services on site. It's going to be beautiful. It's going to help people, just like you always wanted." She traced her fingers over her mother's name on the headstone. Margaret Chen, visionary, builder, beloved mother. The inscription didn't mention the empire, the billions, the secret life. It didn't need to. The buildings spoke for themselves. "The company is doing well, really well. We've expanded into sustainable development in 4 new cities. We're setting new industry standards for ethical business practices, and we're profitable. You'd be proud of that part. You always said that good work and good profits weren't mutually exclusive. You were right." A cold wind swept through the cemetery, rustling the bare tree branches. Elena pulled her coat tighter. "I saw Marcus last month, by accident, at a conference in Portland. He looked different, humbler, smaller. He came up to me, asked if we could talk. I almost said no. But then I remembered what you said in your letter about grace, about not letting his cruelty make me cruel. So I listened." Elena paused, remembering the conversation. Marcus had looked older, tired, but somehow more human than she'd ever seen him. He'd apologized. Not in a way that asked for forgiveness, but in a way that acknowledged the truth. I was a monster to you, he'd said. I can't undo that. I can't make it right. But I want you to know I'm trying to be different. I'm in therapy 3 times a week. I'm working on understanding why I became what I became. And I'm sorry for all of it, especially for your mother. That's the thing I can never forgive myself for. Elena had listened, had nodded, had accepted the apology without offering forgiveness. Because some things were unforgivable, but she'd also seen something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Genuine remorse. Real understanding of what he'd done and who he'd been. I don't know if people can really change, Elena said to her mother's grave. But I think maybe he's trying. I don't forgive him. I never will. But I don't hate him anymore either. Mostly I just feel sad for him, for the childhood he had, for the man his father made him into. For all the years he wasted being cruel when he could have chosen something better. She stood, brushing snow from her knees. Anyway, I wanted you to know. The empire you built, the legacy you left, it's being used for good now. We're changing the industry. We're proving that business can be ethical and profitable. We're building things that help people instead of just extracting wealth from them. We're making the Donovan name, the Chen name, mean something positive. Elena touched the headstone one more time. I miss you every day. I wish you could see what we've accomplished. I wish you could meet the team I've built, see the projects we're working on. But I think maybe you can. I think maybe you're watching somehow, and I hope you're proud. She turned to leave, then stopped as something caught her eye. On Catherine's grave, next to her mother's, someone had left flowers. Fresh red roses, expensive ones. There was a card attached. Elena picked it up and read, Catherine, I finally understand what you tried to teach me. I'm sorry it took so long. I'm sorry for everything. I hope you and Margaret are building something beautiful wherever you are. Your son, Marcus. Elena stared at the card for a long moment. Then she placed it back on Catherine's grave, next to the roses. Maybe people could change. Maybe even monsters could learn to be human again. It didn't excuse what they'd done. It didn't erase the harm they'd caused. But it suggested that redemption wasn't impossible, that people could face the worst parts of themselves and choose to be better. Elena walked back to her car, where her assistant waited with a tablet full of emails and meeting requests and 1,000 other things that required her attention. The work never stopped, but that was okay. She was building something that mattered, something her mother would be proud of, something that honored the legacy of 2 brilliant sisters who'd changed an industry while one of them stayed hidden in the shadows. As she drove away from the cemetery, Elena glanced in the rearview mirror one last time at the 2 graves side by side. The sisters reunited at last. She smiled. Thank you, Mom, she whispered, for everything. Then she turned her attention to the road ahead, to the empire waiting for her guidance, to the future she was building one ethical decision at a time. The past was honored, the present was secure, and the future was bright with possibility. Marcus Donovan had kicked her out into the snow, had let her mother die, had tried to destroy her spirit with 3 years of cruelty. But Elena had survived, more than survived. She'd taken the empire he thought was his and transformed it into something he never could have imagined. She'd proven that power and compassion could coexist. She'd shown that strength didn't require cruelty. And in doing so, she'd honored her mother's final wish, to build something beautiful. The city glittered ahead of her, full of her mother's buildings, her own projects, the collaborative work of 2 generations of brilliant women who'd refused to let men like Robert and Marcus Donovan define what power meant. Elena merged into traffic, heading back to headquarters, ready for whatever challenges waited. She was Elena Chen Donovan, CEO, billionaire, builder, survivor, and she was just getting started.